The parking lot outside the Riverside Concert Hall was almost full when Maya pulled in. Her hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tight, and she sat there for a moment, just breathing. Through the windshield, she could see young people walking toward the entrance. They carried instrument cases like they owned the world, confident, ready, everything she wasn't. She looked down at the violin case on her passenger seat. The leather was cracked and faded, held together in one corner with duct tape her grandmother had applied 30 years ago. Maya remembered watching her do it, remembered how carefully those wrinkled hands had smoothed down the tape. "This violin has music in it," her grandmother had said. "Someday you'll let it out." That was a long time ago. Maya was 42 now, and she'd spent most of those years keeping the music locked inside. She finally got out of the car. The autumn air was crisp and leaves skittered across the parking lot. Maya wore a simple black dress, the one she'd bought for Thomas's funeral 3 months ago. She hadn't planned to wear it again so soon, but nothing else felt right. Maybe because he should have been here with her. Maybe because this whole thing was for him. Inside the concert hall, the energy hit her like a wave. The lobby was packed with musicians, most of them in their 20s. They stood in clusters, talking and laughing. Some were doing vocal warm-ups. Others had their instruments out already, running through scales. The sound was overwhelming, a mix of violin, cello, piano, and voices all competing for space. Maya felt invisible as she made her way through the crowd. Nobody looked at her twice. She was just another middle-aged woman, probably someone's mom who got lost on the way to the bathroom. That's what it felt like anyway. She found the registration table and signed in. The young woman behind it checked her name off the list and handed her a number. "You're number 47, she said, barely looking up. "Warm-up area is through those doors. You'll be called when it's your turn." "Thank you," Maya said quietly. The warm-up area was even more intimidating than the lobby. It was a large room with high ceilings and mirrors along one wall. Chairs were scattered everywhere, and every single one seemed to be taken by someone young and talented and sure of themselves. A guy who couldn't have been more than 23 was playing Paganini on his violin, the notes flying out so fast Maya could barely track them. Near the window, a woman with perfect posture was doing vocal exercises that sounded like they belonged in an opera house. Maya found a spot in the back corner, as far from everyone else as she could get. She sat down and carefully opened her violin case. The instrument looked even older than she remembered. The wood was dark with age, and there were tiny scratches all over it from years of practice. But when she picked it up, it felt right. It always did. She rosined her bow slowly, trying to calm her nerves. Her hands were shaking a little. This was a mistake, she thought. What was she doing here? She was a night shift nurse who played violin in her apartment. She wasn't a performer. She'd never been a performer. But then she remembered Thomas in the hospital bed, his hand so thin in hers. "Promise me," he'd said, his voice barely a whisper. "Promise me you'll let them hear you play, just once. Please, Maya, don't hide anymore." She'd promised, and Thomas had never asked her for much. Maya positioned the violin under her chin and began to play, very softly. She wasn't trying to warm up properly or show off. She just needed to feel the instrument, to remember why she loved this. Her bow moved gently across the strings, and the notes came out quiet and careful. She played a simple melody, something she'd made up years ago during a particularly long night shift. It was nothing special, just a little tune that had always made her feel peaceful. As she played, some of the tension in her shoulders started to ease. Around her, the other musicians continued their impressive warm-ups. Nobody paid any attention to the woman in the corner playing so softly you could barely hear her, except for one person. Mr. Harrison, the audition coordinator, was walking through the warm-up area with his clipboard, checking on everyone. He was an older man, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that had seen everything. He'd been coordinating auditions at this hall for 20 years, and he'd heard thousands of musicians. He was about to walk past Maya's corner when something made him stop. He couldn't explain it later when people asked. There was just something about those quiet notes. They weren't technically impressive. They weren't loud or fast or showing off. But they had something else, something real. He stood there for a moment, just listening. Maya didn't notice him. Her eyes were closed and she was somewhere else, somewhere only the music could take her. After a minute, Mr. Harrison made a small note on his clipboard and moved on. But he kept thinking about that woman in the corner. Maya continued to practice, her confidence slowly building. The violin felt good in her hands. It always did. For 20 years, she'd played this instrument almost every day. 4 hours a day, sometimes more. After her shifts at the hospital, when most people would be too tired to think, she'd come home and play. When Thomas had gotten sick and the world felt like it was ending, she'd played. When he died and the apartment felt too empty and too quiet, she'd played until her fingers ached. Music had been her therapy, her meditation, her best friend. She'd learned almost everything from videos and books, teaching herself piece by piece. The violin had been the one constant in a life that had thrown her plenty of curves. But she'd never played for anyone except Thomas and her grandmother. The thought of walking out onto that stage, of all those eyes on her, of all those judgments waiting to happen, it made her stomach twist. Across the room, she heard two young musicians talking. Their voices carried more than they probably realized. "Did you see that older woman who signed in?" one of them said. "What is she, like 40-something? "I know, right? It's sweet that she's trying, I guess. My mom plays piano for fun, too. It's a nice hobby." They weren't trying to be cruel. They probably didn't even think Maya could hear them. But their words stung anyway. A hobby. That's what they thought this was. Maya's bow paused on the strings. She looked down at her grandmother's violin, at all those scratches and signs of age. She thought about all those hours, all those nights, all that love she'd poured into learning this instrument that nobody had ever heard. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was foolish. Maybe she should pack up and go home, back to her apartment where the music could stay safely hidden. But then she remembered Thomas's face when she played for him, the way he'd close his eyes and smile even when the pain was bad. "You have a gift," he always said. "I wish the world could hear what I hear." She took a deep breath and started playing again, still soft, still gentle, just for herself, just for Thomas, just for her grandmother who'd believed in her all those years ago. In 15 minutes, they'd call her number. In 15 minutes, everything would change. But right now, in this corner, with her grandmother's violin and her husband's memory, Maya let the music be enough. The numbers were being called faster than Maya expected. She'd been sitting in her corner for maybe 20 minutes when she heard, "Number 32, you're up next." That meant only 15 people ahead of her now. Her heart started beating faster. She watched as number 32, a young man with styled hair and an expensive-looking suit, walked confidently toward the stage door. He carried his cello like it was an extension of himself. As he passed a group of his friends, they gave him fist bumps and whispered encouragements. He looked back and grinned, completely at ease. Maya couldn't imagine feeling that way. Not in a million years. She continued her soft practice, trying to focus on the music instead of the knot in her stomach. But it was getting harder to ignore the conversations happening around her. "Did anyone else see the age range on the sign-up sheet?" a young woman near Maya said to her friend. She was holding a flute and wore her hair in a neat bun. "I think there's someone in their 40s auditioning." Her friend, a pianist based on the sheet music she was holding, laughed. "Seriously? That's brave, I guess. I mean, good for them for having a hobby. Right? My aunt started learning guitar last year." She loves it. But she'd never, audition for something like this. They weren't looking at Maya. They had no idea she could hear every word. Or maybe they did know and just didn't care. Young people sometimes forget that invisible people have ears. Maya's bow slipped slightly on the strings, hitting a wrong note. She stopped playing and pretended to adjust her shoulder rest. Her face felt hot. A hobby. There was that word again. She wanted to stand up and tell them about the 4 hours a day for 20 years. Tell them about the textbooks she'd studied, the technique videos she'd watched until her eyes hurt, the calluses on her fingers from practicing until they bled. Tell them this wasn't a hobby any more than breathing was a hobby. But she didn't say anything. She just sat there, feeling small. "Number 33, the coordinator's voice called out. 14 people to go. Across the room, a group of 3 musicians were stretching near the mirrors. They were talking in low voices. But the acoustics in the room carried their conversation right to Maya's corner. "I heard the judges are pretty tough this year," one of them said, a violinist with a bright red instrument case. "Especially Mrs. Chen. She studied at Juilliard and played with the New York Philharmonic for 15 years. "Great," another replied, sounding nervous. "Just what I need, someone who'll spot every tiny mistake." The third one, a cellist, shook her head. "At least we've got training. Did you see that woman in the black dress? The older one in the back? I overheard someone say she's only had 3 formal lessons her entire life." "Wait, what? Then why is she even here?" "No idea. Maybe she doesn't realize how competitive this is?" They moved away toward the water fountain, still talking. But Maya had heard enough. Her hands were trembling now, and not just a little. The violin suddenly felt heavy in her lap. 3 formal lessons. They'd gotten that detail right somehow. Had she mentioned it when she registered? She couldn't remember. But hearing it said out loud like that, hearing the judgment in their voices, it made her feel like a fraud. Who was she kidding? These people had been training at conservatories and music schools. They'd had private instructors and master classes. They'd performed in recitals and competitions since they were children. And here she was, a night shift nurse who learned from YouTube videos and library books. Maya carefully placed her violin back in its case. Her hands were shaking too much to play anymore. She looked toward the exit. She could just leave. Nobody would notice. Nobody would care. Number 47 would be called, and when she didn't show up, they'd just move on to 48. Simple as that. She was actually starting to stand when Mr. Harrison appeared in front of her. "Excuse me," he said gently. "You're number 47, right?" Maya nodded, unable to speak. He smiled, and there was something kind in his eyes. "I heard you playing earlier. That melody you were working on, the quiet one. Did you write that yourself?" She was surprised he'd even noticed. "Yes," she managed to say. "It's just something I made up. Nothing special." "It was lovely," he said. "Very honest. We don't get much honest music at these auditions. Lots of technical skill, sure. But honest?" He shook his head. "That's rare." Maya didn't know what to say to that. Mr. Harrison checked something on his clipboard. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, he continued, "and I've learned to listen for something beyond the notes. You've got that something. Don't leave before you audition, okay? I'd like to hear what you can really do." Then he walked away, leaving Maya standing there, confused and a little bit hopeful and still terrified all at once. She sat back down slowly. Through the doorway to the stage, she could hear someone playing Vivaldi. They were good, technically perfect from what she could tell. The notes were fast and precise, hitting every mark exactly right. But Mr. Harrison's words kept echoing in her head. Honest music. What did that even mean? "Number 38, the voice called. 9 people to go. Maya opened her violin case again. She picked up the instrument, not to play, but just to hold it. The wood was warm from being in the case. She ran her finger along the curve of the body, feeling every familiar scratch and dent. This violin had been with her through everything, when her grandmother died and left it to her in the will, when she met Thomas at the hospital where they both worked, him as a technician, her as a new nurse, when they got married in a tiny ceremony with 10 people, when money was tight and they lived on rice and beans for months, when Thomas got his diagnosis and the world stopped making sense, when he made her promise to do this one thing. The violin knew all of it, every joy, every heartbreak, every lonely night. All of it was in there somewhere, in the music she'd created over 2 decades of playing. Maybe that's what Mr. Harrison meant by honest. Another musician near the stage door was talking to her friend. "I'm so nervous I could throw up," she was saying. "What if I mess up? What if they hate it?" Her friend put a hand on her shoulder. "You've been practicing this piece for 6 months. You've got this. Just remember why you love music." Why you love music. Such simple words, but they hit Maya hard. She did love music. That's why she played 4 hours a day even when she was exhausted. That's why she kept going even when nobody heard her. That's why she was here, in this overwhelming room full of people who seemed to belong here more than she did. Number 41, 6 people to go. Maya's phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out and saw a text from her friend Rachel, one of the other nurses from the hospital. "How's it going? Are you doing okay? Remember, Thomas believed in you. We all do." Attached was a photo Rachel must have taken months ago without Maya knowing. It showed Thomas in his hospital bed, eyes closed, smiling peacefully. And there was Maya beside him, playing her violin. The image was a little blurry, but you could see the love in it, the connection. Maya felt tears starting and blinked them back. Not now. She couldn't fall apart now. She typed back quickly. "Scared, but still here. Thank you." Number 43. 4 people to go. The room felt smaller now. The conversations around her continued. People discussing their pieces, their training, their hopes. Maya closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to play just for Thomas. How the rest of the world would disappear. How nothing else mattered except the music flowing between them. That's what she needed to find on that stage. Not technical perfection, not a flawless performance, just that feeling, that honest connection. Number 45. 2 people to go. Maya stood up. Her legs felt shaky, but she forced them to be steady. She did some gentle stretches, rolling her shoulders, flexing her fingers. She picked up her violin and played a few scales, still quietly, just to warm up her hands. The musician next to her, number 46, glanced over. He was young, maybe 25, with a viola case. "First time auditioning here?" he asked. Maya nodded. "Me too," he said, and he looked as nervous as she felt. "I keep telling myself that the worst thing that can happen is they say no, and I'll still have my music either way, you know?" It was such a simple observation, but it helped somehow. She'd still have her music. No matter what happened in the next hour, she'd still go home to her grandmother's violin. She'd still play. She'd still have that. Number 46. The young man with the viola took a deep breath. "Well, here goes nothing." He smiled at Maya. "Good luck to you." "You too," she said, and then she was alone in her corner, the last one waiting. Number 47. Maya held her violin close and tried to breathe. Just breathe. In a few minutes, they'd call her name. In a few minutes, she'd walk through that door onto the stage. In a few minutes, she'd either prove Mr. Harrison right about honest music, or she'd prove everyone else right about foolish hobbies. Either way, she'd made a promise, and Maya had never broken a promise to Thomas. She wasn't about to start now. The voice came through the speaker system, clear and final. "Number 47. For a second, Maya couldn't move. She just stood there in her corner, violin in one hand, bow in the other, feeling like her feet had been nailed to the floor. This was it. This was really happening. "Number 47, please proceed to the stage," the voice repeated, a little more insistent this time. Maya's legs finally remembered how to work. She walked toward the stage door, each step feeling strange and floaty, like she was moving through water. A few people glanced at her as she passed. One woman gave her an encouraging smile. Another looked surprised, like she couldn't quite believe the older woman in the corner was actually going through with this. The stage door was heavy. Maya had to use her shoulder to push it open. On the other side was a dim hallway that led to the wings of the stage. She could hear someone wrapping up their performance, the final notes of Mozart echoing through the space. There was applause from the judges, polite and measured. Then footsteps as the musician exited from the other side. A young woman with a clipboard appeared next to Maya. She looked barely out of college, with a professional smile and tired eyes that said she'd been herding nervous musicians all day. "Number 47? Great. You'll go on as soon as I give you the signal. What's your name again?" "Maya. Maya Chen." The young woman checked her list. "Okay, Maya, and what are you performing for us today?" "I'm playing violin. It's a piece I composed myself." The woman's eyebrows went up slightly. "Original composition. Nice. That's always interesting for the judges." She made a note on her clipboard. "Any special requirements? Do you need the piano accompaniment or a music stand?" "No, just me and the violin." "Perfect. That makes it easy." The woman studied Maya for a moment, and her professional demeanor softened just a bit. "Hey, you're going to do great. Just breathe and play your piece. The judges are actually pretty nice people, even if they look intimidating." Before Maya could respond, the woman was speaking into a small radio. "Number 47 is ready. Maya Chen, original composition on violin." She listened to the response through her earpiece, then nodded to Maya. "Okay, they're ready for you. Just walk straight out to center stage. You'll see a small piece of tape on the floor. That's your mark. Introduce yourself, tell them your piece title, and then begin whenever you're ready. You've got this." She pulled back the black curtain, and there it was, the stage. Maya had seen concert stages before, of course, on TV, in movies, in videos online. But seeing one in person, from the performer's perspective, was completely different. It was enormous. The stage stretched out in front of her, lit by bright lights that seemed to push back against an ocean of darkness beyond. She could barely see the audience seating, but she knew it was there, hundreds of empty chairs bearing witness. At the front of the stage, about 20 feet back from the edge, was a long table. 3 people sat behind it, silhouetted against the stage lights. The judges. 3 people who would decide if she was good enough, if all those years of practice meant anything, if Thomas had been right about her gift. Maya's hands were sweating. She gripped her violin tighter and walked forward. Each step echoed. The stage was so quiet she could hear her own breathing. She found the tape mark and stood on it, facing the judges. The lights were in her eyes, hot and bright. She blinked and tried to focus. "Whenever you're ready," a voice called from the judges' table. It was a woman's voice, not unkind, but businesslike. Maya cleared her throat. "Hello. My name is Maya Chen, and I'll be playing an original composition tonight." "And what's the title of your piece?" the same voice asked. Maya hadn't really thought about a title. The music had just been hers, something private that had never needed a name. But standing there under the lights, she knew exactly what to call it. "It's called For Thomas," she said quietly. There was a pause. She thought she saw one of the judges lean forward slightly. "You may begin," the woman said. Maya positioned her violin under her chin. Her hands were shaking worse than they had in the warm-up room. She raised her bow to the strings and almost dropped it. Her fingers felt numb and clumsy. The lights were too bright. The stage was too big. The silence was too heavy. She could hear her grandmother's voice in her head. "This violin has music in it. Someday, you'll let it out." She could hear Thomas in the hospital. "Promise me you'll let them hear you play, just once." She'd made it this far. She couldn't stop now. Maya took a breath and began to play. The first notes came out soft, almost apologetic. Her bow trembled against the strings. The sound was small and scared, barely reaching past the edge of the stage. She was playing it safe, trying not to make mistakes, trying not to embarrass herself. This was exactly what everyone expected from the nervous older woman who didn't belong here. She could feel the judges waiting, patient but already forming their opinions. She could imagine what they were thinking. Nice try. Good effort. Better luck next time. The music continued, still quiet, still careful. She was playing the notes she'd planned, the melody she'd practiced. But something was wrong. It didn't sound right. It didn't sound like anything, really. Just notes in the air, going through the motions, saying nothing at all. This wasn't the music Thomas had loved. This wasn't why she played 4 hours a day. This wasn't honest. And suddenly, standing there on that huge stage under those burning lights, Maya realized something. She'd already lost everything that mattered. Her grandmother was gone. Thomas was gone. The worst had already happened. What was left to be afraid of? These judges couldn't hurt her more than life already had. Their rejection couldn't compare to watching the person you love most in the world slip away. Their judgment meant nothing next to the empty apartment she went home to every night. She had nothing left to lose, and she had 20 years of music inside her that deserved to be heard. Something shifted in Maya's chest. It felt like a door opening, or a dam breaking, or maybe like waking up from a long sleep. Her shoulders relaxed, her grip on the bow loosened, her eyes closed. She stopped playing what she'd planned and started playing what she felt. The music changed. It was still the same melody, the same notes, but everything was different. The sound grew stronger, richer, fuller. Her bow moved across the strings with new confidence, new purpose. The scared, apologetic music was gone, replaced by something real and raw and alive. She played pain, the grief of loss, the ache of missing someone who would never come back. Her bow dug into the strings, pulling out notes that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her hands, deeper than her training, deeper than anything she could explain. Then the music shifted again, not to happiness exactly, but to something else. Memory. Love. She played Thomas's laugh, the way he'd smile when she'd play something beautiful. She played her grandmother's weathered hands carefully placing tape on the old violin case. She played every quiet night in her apartment when music was the only thing that kept her standing. The technical skills she'd taught herself from videos and books took over. Her fingers flew across the fingerboard, finding positions she'd practiced 10,000 times. The muscle memory of 2 decades guided her bow through dynamics she'd studied until her eyes hurt. All those hours, all that lonely practice, all that love for music poured out through her grandmother's violin. She wasn't playing for the judges anymore. She wasn't even playing for Thomas, not really. She was playing for herself, for every version of herself who'd been too scared to do this, for the 7-year-old girl whose lessons had ended too soon, for the young woman who'd played in secret, for the wife who'd found comfort in music when everything else fell apart. The piece moved through sections she'd composed over the years, each one telling a different chapter of her life. The melody wove through sadness and joy, through darkness and small, brave lights. It wasn't technically perfect. There were probably mistakes the judges could point out. But it was true. It was honest. It was hers. In the darkness beyond the stage lights, something was happening. Maya couldn't see it with her eyes closed, couldn't know it yet. But the judges at their table had stopped writing notes. The stage crew in the wings had stopped moving. In the warm-up room, musicians who'd been packing up their instruments paused, hearing something through the walls that made them want to listen. Maya played on, lost in the music, lost in the memories, lost in everything she'd kept hidden for so long. Her bow danced and sang and cried and laughed. The violin, her grandmother's old battered violin, held together with duct tape, sang like it had been waiting for this moment all along. And somewhere, Maya thought she could feel Thomas listening, feel him smiling, feel him saying, "There you are, that's my girl. That's the music I always heard." She played until there was nothing left to say, until the story was told, until the last note hung in the air like a prayer. Then silence. Complete and total silence. Maya's eyes slowly opened. She lowered her violin. Her bow hand was shaking again, but for different reasons now. The stage lights were still bright. The darkness beyond was still dark, and she had no idea what happened next. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Maya stood there on the stage, her violin still under her chin, her bow hand hanging at her side. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The stage lights felt even hotter now, and she could feel sweat on her forehead. Had she made a terrible mistake? Had she gotten too carried away? Maybe she should have stuck with the safe, quiet version. Maybe letting all that emotion out was unprofessional, embarrassing even. Then she heard it. A sound from the judge's table. At first, she couldn't identify it. It was soft, almost like someone trying to catch their breath. Maya squinted against the lights, trying to see. One of the judges was standing up. Maya could make out a figure now, a woman with gray hair pulled back. The woman's hand was pressed to her mouth. Even from the stage, even with the bright lights, Maya could see the wetness on her cheeks. The judge was crying. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just need a moment." She sat back down heavily, pulling a tissue from somewhere. The other two judges were silent, looking at their colleague with concern and something else. Something that looked like understanding. Maya didn't know what to do. Should she apologize? Should she leave? Had she done something wrong? The judge wiped her eyes and looked up at Maya. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger but still shaky. "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was 7, Maya answered. "But I only had 3 formal lessons before my family couldn't afford them anymore. Everything else I taught myself." Another judge, a man with glasses and a neat beard, leaned forward. "You're self-taught?" He sounded genuinely shocked. "That can't be right. The technique, the dynamics, the emotional control, that's not self-taught." "I used videos," Maya said simply, "and books from the library. And I practiced. A lot." "How much is a lot?" the woman who'd been crying asked. She was the head judge, Mrs. Chen, the one who'd played with the New York Philharmonic. 4 hours a day, for about 20 years. All 3 judges looked at each other. The third judge, a younger man who hadn't spoken yet, let out a low whistle. 4 hours a day for 20 years? That's over 29,000 hours. "And you never performed before?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Only for my husband, and my grandmother before she passed. Nobody else." Maya hesitated. "My husband died 3 months ago. He made me promise to do this, to let people hear me play at least once." The silence came back, but it was different now. Heavier somehow, more full. Mrs. Chen stood again, more composed this time. "Would you mind staying on stage for a moment? We need to confer." Maya nodded. She watched as the 3 judges leaned together, speaking in low voices she couldn't hear. They looked at papers on the table. They looked back at her. They kept talking. Behind her, Maya could hear movement in the wings. The young woman with the clipboard was there, along with Mr. Harrison. They were both staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Then something else happened. The door from the warm-up room opened and people started filing in, the other musicians. They weren't supposed to be here. Only performers and judges were allowed in the performance space during auditions. But they came anyway, drawn by something they'd heard even through the thick walls. The young violinist with the red case was there, the woman with the flute, the nervous guy with the viola who'd wished Maya good luck. They stood in the wings and at the sides of the stage, silent and watching. Maya felt exposed standing there in the center of the stage with all these eyes on her. She wanted to disappear. This was too much attention, too many people seeing her. Finally, the judges finished their discussion. Mrs. Chen stood and walked around the table, coming closer to the stage. She stopped at the edge, looking up at Maya. Her eyes were still red from crying. "I've been judging auditions for 15 years, she said, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I've heard thousands of musicians, students from the best schools, professionals with decades of performance experience, child prodigies, competition winners." She paused. "What you just did up there? That was something different. That was something I haven't heard in a very long time." Maya felt her throat tighten. She didn't trust herself to speak. Mrs. Chen continued. "Technical skill can be taught. Perfect pitch, flawless execution, speed, accuracy. These things can all be learned. But what you just shared with us? That kind of raw, honest emotion? That connection between the musician and the music? You can't teach that. You either have it or you don't." She smiled, and it was warm and genuine. "You have it." The other musicians in the wing started clapping. It began with just one person, then another, then suddenly everyone was applauding. The sound filled the concert hall, bouncing off the walls and ceiling. Maya stood there overwhelmed, holding her grandmother's violin and trying not to cry. Mrs. Chen held up her hand, and the applause died down. "We don't usually make decisions immediately. Normally, we'd deliberate for several days, review recordings, compare all the performers. But my colleagues and I are in unanimous agreement." She looked at the other judges, who both nodded. "Maya Chen, we would like to offer you first place in this competition." The words didn't make sense at first. First place? Maya had just been hoping not to embarrass herself. First place wasn't even something she'd let herself imagine. "The prize includes a full scholarship to the Music Academy," Mrs. Chen went on. "That's 4 years of training with some of the best instructors in the country. It also includes performance opportunities with the City Philharmonic. 3 guaranteed performances over the next year." Maya's legs felt weak. She thought she might fall down right there on the stage. Mr. Harrison emerged from the wings, his face split by a huge smile. "I told you," he said to Maya. "I told you there was something special. Honest music is rare, and you've got it in spades." The young woman with the clipboard was crying now, too, dabbing at her eyes with her sleeve. The musicians in the wings were talking excitedly among themselves. A few of them were looking at Maya with something like awe. The violinist with the red case stepped forward. She was one of the people who'd been talking about Maya in the warm-up room, calling music her hobby. Her face was flushed. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For what I said earlier, I didn't understand. I didn't know." Maya found her voice. "You couldn't have known. It's okay." "No, it's not okay. I was being judgmental and small-minded." The young woman looked genuinely distressed. "What you just did up there, that's what I've been trying to do my whole life. I've studied at conservatory. I've had the best teachers. But I've never played anything that moved people like that. I don't know if I ever will." Before Maya could respond, other musicians were coming forward too. They wanted to congratulate her, to ask her questions, to touch her violin like it held some kind of magic. Mrs. Chen rescued her from the crowd. "Maya, could we talk privately for a moment? There's an office just off stage." Maya followed her, grateful for the escape. The office was small and quiet, with posters of famous musicians on the walls and shelves full of music books. Mrs. Chen gestured for Maya to sit. "I wanted to explain why your performance affected me so deeply," she said, sitting across from Maya. "My mother was a violinist. She was incredibly talented but never got to pursue music professionally. She had to work to support her family, and music became something she only did late at night, when everyone else was asleep. Mrs. Chen's eyes grew distant. She died when I was 20, and I became a professional musician partly to honor her dream, but somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started. It became about technique and perfection and reputation. She looked directly at Maya. What you played tonight reminded me of my mother. She played like that, with her whole heart. No pretense, no performance, just truth. She wiped her eyes again. So thank you. You gave me a gift tonight, even if you didn't know it. Maya didn't know what to say. She'd come here just to keep a promise to Thomas. She never imagined any of this. Can I ask you something? Mrs. Chen said. Why did you wait so long? With that much talent and dedication, you could have been performing for years. Maya thought about it. I was scared, she said finally, and I didn't think I was good enough. My husband always told me I was, but I thought he was just being kind because he loved me. She ran her hand over the violin case. I guess I needed to lose him before I could really hear what he'd been saying all along. He was right, Mrs. Chen said softly, and I think he'd be very proud of you tonight. I think so too, Maya whispered. They sat there for a moment in comfortable silence. Outside, Maya could hear the excited chatter of musicians and staff. Her life had just changed completely in the space of 15 minutes. Tomorrow, she'd be a student again at age 42. She'd be performing with an actual orchestra. She'd be doing something she'd never allowed herself to dream about. It was terrifying and thrilling and overwhelming all at once. But underneath all of that, Maya felt something else, something quiet and warm and true. She felt Thomas smiling. She felt her grandmother's proud hands on her shoulders. And she felt, for the first time in a very long time, like maybe she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The morning after the audition, Maya woke up thinking it had all been a dream. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, half expecting to realize none of it had really happened. But then she looked over at the chair where she'd carefully placed her grandmother's violin the night before. Next to it was a folder of paperwork from the music academy. Registration forms, class schedules, a letter of congratulations signed by Mrs. Chen herself. It was real, all of it. Maya got up and made coffee, her hands still a little shaky. Her phone had blown up overnight, texts from Rachel and other nurses at the hospital, an email from the academy asking when she could start, 3 voicemails from a local news station wanting to interview her, even a message from the young violinist with the red case, asking if Maya would consider giving her some advice sometime. It was overwhelming. Maya had spent 42 years being invisible, and now suddenly everyone wanted to see her. The news story ran that evening. Local nurses' hidden talent stuns judges at music competition. They'd used a photo someone had taken of her on stage, mid-performance, completely lost in the music. Maya barely recognized herself. That woman looked fearless. That woman looked alive. Rachel called immediately after the segment aired. Maya, you're on TV. Everyone at the hospital is talking about it. We're all so proud of you. It doesn't feel real yet, Maya admitted. Well, it better start feeling real soon because you're about to be really busy, Rachel laughed. Are you still going to work night shifts? Maya had been thinking about that. She loved her job at the hospital. She loved helping people. But she also knew she couldn't do both, not if she was going to take this music opportunity seriously. I'm going to take a leave of absence, she said. Maybe eventually I'll come back part-time, but right now, I need to see where this goes. Thomas would be so happy, Rachel said softly. Yeah, Maya agreed, feeling that familiar ache in her chest. He would. The first day at the music academy was terrifying in a completely different way than the audition had been. Maya walked into a building full of young people with instrument cases, everyone moving with the casual confidence of belonging. She felt like an imposter again. too old, too inexperienced, too different. But then she met her instructor, Professor Williams, a kind man in his 60s who'd played violin professionally for decades. He listened to her play for just 5 minutes before stopping her. "You've developed some unusual techniques," he said. "Self-teaching will do that. Some of them are actually quite clever. Others we'll need to refine." He smiled. "But your musicality, your emotional connection to the instrument, that's already at a professional level. My job is just to give you the technical tools to match what you already have inside." Over the next few months, Maya learned things she'd only dreamed about: proper bow hold, advanced vibrato techniques, how to read complex musical notation she'd never encountered in her books. She practiced with other students, some of them young enough to be her children. Most of them treated her with respect, curious about the woman who'd won the competition. A few became friends. The hardest part wasn't the training. It was learning to perform in front of people. After 20 years of playing alone in her apartment, having an audience felt strange and exposing. But Professor Williams was patient. "You already did the hardest performance at the audition," he reminded her. "Everything after that is just practice." Her first performance with the City Philharmonic came 6 months after the audition. Maya stood backstage in a borrowed formal gown, holding her grandmother's violin, feeling that old familiar terror trying to creep back in. Mr. Harrison was there, coordinating the event. He'd become something of a mentor to her. "Remember," he said, "they're here because they want to hear you. They're on your side." The piece was one she'd chosen herself, a classical work by Brahms that she'd always loved, followed by an original composition. When she walked onto that stage with the full orchestra behind her, when she raised her violin and the conductor gave the signal, something magical happened. She wasn't alone anymore. She was part of something bigger. The orchestra surrounded her with sound, supporting her, lifting her up. And when it came time for her solo section, she played with all the honesty she'd found at the audition, but now with new technical skills to express it even better. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Maya bowed, her eyes scanning the crowd, half wishing Thomas could have been there to see it. But in a way, she felt like he was. After the performance, a producer from a small record label approached her. "I've been thinking about this since I heard you at the audition," he said. "Have you ever considered recording an album?" Maya laughed. "6 months ago, I'd never performed for anyone except my husband. An album seems impossible." "It's not impossible, it's just the next step." The producer handed her his card. "Think about it. I think people would want to hear your story, your music." Maya did think about it. For weeks, she turned the idea over in her mind. An album felt too big, too presumptuous. Who was she to think people would want to buy her music? But then she remembered something Thomas used to say. "You're not making music for everyone. You're making it for the people who need it. If it helps even one person the way it helped me, isn't that worth it?" She called the producer back. Recording the album took 3 months. It was some of the hardest work Maya had ever done, even harder than nursing night shifts. Every note was captured, every mistake preserved until she got it right. But it was also joyful. She recorded pieces she'd composed over the years, each one telling a part of her story. Songs about loss and hope, about loneliness and connection, about finding yourself when you thought you were too old to be found. She titled the album Songs for Thomas. The album cover was simple. A photo of her grandmother's violin, the duct tape visible, resting on an old hospital blanket. Inside the album booklet, Maya wrote about Thomas, about her grandmother, about the 20 years of practice that no one had seen. She wrote about being scared and doing it anyway. About keeping promises, about honest music. The album released on a Tuesday in spring. Maya didn't expect much. Maybe a few hundred copies sold to friends and family, maybe some local interest. But something unexpected happened. One of the songs was featured on a podcast about late-life creativity. Then a popular streaming service added it to a playlist about overcoming adversity. Then someone made a video that went viral, talking about Maya's story and playing clips of her music. Within 2 months, Songs for Thomas had sold over 100,000 copies. Then 200,000. Articles were written about her. She was invited to perform at larger venues. Other orchestras wanted to book her. Music students started citing her as an inspiration. Maya did interview after interview, always feeling slightly bewildered by the attention. "I'm just a person who loves music," she'd say. "I'm not special." But people would shake their heads. "That's exactly why you are special. You remind us that it's never too late, that practice and passion matter more than pedigree, that the best art comes from the heart." One day, Maya was teaching a beginner's class at the academy. It was something she'd started doing once a week, working with adult students who were just starting their musical journey. A woman in her 50s was struggling with a simple scale, frustrated to tears. "I'm too old for this," the woman said. "I should have started when I was young." Maya sat down next to her. "I started performing at 42. I had 3 formal lessons my entire childhood. Everything else I learned on my own, one note at a time." She picked up her violin. "Age doesn't matter. Timing doesn't matter. What matters is that you start, that you keep going, that you give yourself permission to learn and grow and be imperfect." She played a few notes, simple and sweet. "Every expert was once a beginner. Every performance starts with one note. You just have to be brave enough to play it." The woman wiped her eyes and picked up her violin again. That night, Maya went home to her apartment. It still felt empty sometimes without Thomas. That probably wouldn't ever completely go away. But it felt less lonely now. She had her music. She had her students. She had a whole new life she was still learning to live. She opened her violin case and took out her grandmother's instrument. The duct tape was starting to peel again. She really should get it professionally repaired. But she couldn't bring herself to change it. This violin, with all its age and imperfections, had carried her through everything. It felt wrong to make it look new. Maya tuned the strings and began to play, not practicing anything specific, not preparing for a performance, just playing for the joy of it, the way she had for 20 years in this same apartment. But something was different now. She wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't playing in secret. Tomorrow she had a recording session. Next week, a performance in another city. Next month, who knew? She'd kept her promise to Thomas. She'd let people hear her music. She'd been brave when everything in her wanted to run away. And in return, the world had given her more than she ever imagined possible. But the greatest gift wasn't the success or the recognition or even the music career. It was the realization that it had never been too late, that life could surprise you at any age, that hidden talents weren't just talents waiting to be found, they were courage waiting to be claimed. Maya played into the night, her grandmother's violin singing its old, beautiful song. And somewhere, she liked to think, Thomas was listening and smiling, proud of the promise she'd kept and the life she'd finally allowed herself to live.